The morning of January 2016 began without incident. Two kayakers, Ethan Hale and Ryan Cole, pushed off from Tauranga's quiet shoreline at 9 a.m. The sea was calm, the sky a pale blue. By evening, they had not returned. Their rented kayaks were gone, their phones silent. What surfaced instead were two paddles, stripped of context, drifting into the sand. For weeks, search crews combed the coast, their helicopters scarring the air with light. Families waited with photographs pressed to their chests. Nothing answered back. A year later, a sealed evidence envelope revealed a photograph never shown to the public. It depicted those same paddles, side by side, positioned on a barren stretch of shore. The image raised a question the sea never resolved. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from today. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. The day began without alarm. The tide along Tauranga's bay rose slow, pressing foam against the rocks in pale morning light. At 9 a.m., two men carried their rented kayaks across the sand. Ethan Hale walked ahead, his paddle balanced on one shoulder, while Ryan Cole followed, dragging the bow of his boat through shallow ripples. Behind them, the marina shops opened in routine order. Canvas blinds unfurled, radios crackled. Fishermen loaded bait. Nothing distinguished this moment from hundreds before, except that it was the last time anyone saw them alive. Samir Patel, owner of the kayak rental, recorded their departure. His handwriting filled the ledger with precise block letters. Hale, E. Cole, R. 9 a.m. He noted the equipment numbers, initials, deposit amount in full words, the standard procedure. There was no column for returned, only the space left blank. Patel remembered Ryan joking about taking a longer route, circling the outer reef before lunch. Ethan smiled, nodding at the open water. No trace of hesitation appeared in their voices. The weather was considered favorable. Swells ran low, under 1 meter. The wind shifted north, mild and unthreatening. Detective Mark Renard later marked the forecast on an incident board with a black pen. "Safe launch conditions," he wrote, underlined once. His board showed a tide chart beside it, black arrows indicating the men's expected route. The chart ended in a void, just as their journey did. By noon, Lena Ward texted Ethan twice. The messages were routine. "Lunch when you're back?" followed by a smile. Neither delivered. She assumed reception failed offshore. By 3 p.m., she drove to the beach, scanning the horizon with her hand shielding the sun. No colored kayaks moved across the line of blue. By 5 p.m., fishermen hauled their nets ashore, and still no sign of the two men. Clara Hale called police at 6 p.m. Her voice was steady, stripped of panic, as if she expected a rational delay. She told dispatch her son and his friend had rented kayaks at 9 a.m. and should have returned by now. The operator paused, then confirmed, "No overdue return logged." Clara insisted. The operator wrote the names, the rental shop, the time of departure. The line clicked silent for 5 seconds before answering. "We'll send someone." Patel met officers near his shop at 6:30 p.m. He opened the ledger, his finger pressing the entry he had made that morning. He repeated the time twice, pointing at the blank space where the return hour should have been written. Officers asked about equipment condition. Patel said both kayaks were standard yellow plastic, hull numbers K17 and K23. He noted both had come back intact from dozens of rentals before. Nothing defective, nothing unusual. By 7:15 p.m., a patrol car's siren flared along the beach access road. Floodlights swept the waterline. Volunteers gathered. Lena stood with Clara, both silent, both staring past the glare. A helicopter arrived at 8 p.m., its search beam slicing circles across the bay. Radio chatter filled the shoreline with clipped numbers, bearings, and negative results. At 8:40 p.m., an officer walking 50 meters south of the main access point spotted something pale in the surf. He raised his torch. The object rocked in the tide, striking sand, retreating again. It was a kayak paddle, blade coated in sand, shaft scarred by use. The officer lifted it with gloves, water dripping down his sleeve. A yellow evidence marker stood beside it until the tide surged higher. 30 minutes later, a second paddle washed in half a kilometer north. Its blade carried scratches, as if scraped against rock. Together, they looked less like debris and more like fragments of a missing sentence broken apart. Officers photographed them separately, then side by side. Detective Renard arrived at 9:20 p.m. He studied the ledger, the blank return slot, the paddles lying on tarpaulin sheets. His expression remained flat. He ordered both objects bagged, tagged, and logged. His notes read, 2 paddles recovered. Owners absent. No kayak side. No bodies. Families remained on the sand past midnight, standing near the cordoned section where the paddles had been set down. The sea darkened, wind rising colder. One by one, volunteers left. The lights dimmed. What remained were 2 paddles, sealed in clear evidence bags, resting in the back of a police vehicle. They were the only witnesses, mute and useless, of an unfinished journey. 2 paddles on the sand, no voices followed. The shoreline at dawn bore scars from the night before. Floodlights had gone dark, leaving faint arcs of trampled sand, boot prints scattered across dunes, and yellow tape fluttering without sound. The air smelled of salt and kerosene from the helicopter's engines. Families stood in groups, shoulders hunched against the cold. Clara Hale stared at the line where sea met sky, searching for any detail that might have been overlooked. Nothing appeared but emptiness. Detective Mark Renard coordinated the next phase of search. He ordered the Coast Guard to launch boats at first light, plotting a grid from Tauranga eastward toward Motiti Island. Crew members moved with drilled efficiency, unfurling charts, assigning sectors. By 6:15 a.m., the first vessel pushed off, its hull cutting against calm water. From above, the helicopter returned, its search beam useless in daylight yet still sweeping instinctively, as if light itself could summon the missing. On the sand, Lena Ward found herself staring at impressions near the waterline. The tide had risen overnight, erasing most traces, yet a few prints survived in patches of compacted sand. She crouched. The pattern was unmistakable. Bare feet, larger than hers, spaced unevenly. The left print pressed deeper, suggesting uneven weight or an object carried. Beyond that, the trail simply stopped, sliced away by the sea. Forensic officers photographed the impressions. Markers labeled each print before water seeped in, softening their edges. Renard watched, arms folded, his face unreadable. 2 sets, one officer said quietly. End right at the tide. Renard nodded but made no comment. He knew evidence erased this fast meant little in court, yet for the families, it meant everything. By 7:30 a.m., the Coast Guard reported negative findings in their first sweep. Radios crackled with bearings, sound thin in morning air. Clara gripped her coat tight, listening to the code words she did not understand. When asked if she wished to rest, she shook her head. She would not leave the shore while her son was still missing. Volunteers dragged kayaks from storage to aid the search. Their hulls scraped against concrete, echoing down the ramp. Each vessel left at intervals, paddlers scanning waterlines for any sign of debris. From shore, they looked like black dots scattered against the ocean's surface. The crowd cheered faintly at their departure, hope briefly raised before fading back into silence. At 9 a.m., a discovery was logged. North of the harbor, a patrol located a fragment of life jacket foam washed onto rocks. The piece was small, edges frayed, color faded. Bagged, tagged, transported to base, it provided no serial number, no conclusive link. Forensics tested later confirmed it was consistent with jackets supplied by the rental shop. Clara touched the evidence bag with her fingertips, tracing plastic as though it could yield warmth. By 10:15 a.m., the search helicopter relayed images of scattered flotsam near the reef. Investigators recovered a plastic bottle, one fishing float, and nothing more. Waves hissed over rock. Families clustered closer to one another. Lena whispered to Clara that she had dreamt Ethan calling her name. Clara said nothing, eyes locked on the tide. Noon brought exhaustion. Officers rotated shifts, radios losing charge, volunteers stumbling from hunger. The crowd thinned as reporters began arriving, cameras trained on the shoreline, lenses reflecting white glare. Journalists asked if any foul play was suspected. Renard answered with measured tone, "We are treating this as a search and rescue operation. No further comment." Yet the evidence remained uneven. 2 paddles, recovered miles apart. Footprints ending at water's edge. A fragment of jacket, torn loose from context. Every clue suggested presence, but denied closure. Forensics teams placed them on boards, photographs pinned with string, lines connecting objects across empty space. The board resembled a puzzle with its corners missing. That night, Lena returned to the same section of beach. Wind tore across her hair as she crouched where the prints had been. She pressed her own foot into wet sand, aligning her toes with the faded impressions. The tide swept over, erasing both in one cold motion. The investigation recorded the day's evidence under a single phrase: "No persons located." The footprints ended in silence. The water carried nothing back. Detective Mark Renard spread case files across a long steel table inside the Tauranga Marine office. Fluorescent light above him hummed, casting pale shadows across photographs of paddles, jacket fragments, and tide charts. He built the timeline, brick by brick. Departure at 9 a.m., last sighting on open water at 10:15 a.m. by a fisherman. Family alarm at 6 p.m., first paddle recovered at 8:40 p.m. Beyond those points, nothing but empty water and absence. At his side, Clara Hale sat rigid, hands folded in her lap. Her eyes moved across the board but avoided the evidence bags stacked beneath. Lena Ward stood near the window, staring out at the docks. The silence inside the room carried the same weight as the surf. An officer entered with a sealed container. Inside lay a waterproof phone case, its edges scraped, latch bent. The phone inside belonged to Ryan Cole. Forensics noted it had been submerged for hours. Salt water had infiltrated, corroding the charging port, leaving the screen spider-cracked. Renard instructed technicians to attempt data retrieval. Hours later, they returned with their report. No recoverable files. The statement fell into the room like lead. Lena pressed a hand against her mouth. Clara inhaled sharply but made no sound. Renard wrote the finding on the incident board. "Device recovered, data lost." His markers squeaked across the surface, each letter underlined with controlled pressure. By late afternoon, specialists reconstructed possible drift paths using current models. Arrows on the chart scattered in divergent directions depending on wind and tide shifts. Some ended near Motiti Island, others vanished into deeper offshore water. Renard circled them with red ink, the lines branching like veins with no heart. Samir Patel, the rental shop owner, was called in for questioning. He produced his ledger again, pointing to the entry. 9 a.m., Hale, E. Cole, R. He emphasized that both men had paid deposits in full words, returned no complaints, carried standard safety gear. His records showed nothing unusual. Yet when asked about return times, his voice faltered. "They always bring them back before dark," he said. "Always." At 6 p.m., police divers prepared equipment. Air tanks clanked against the dock, masks fogged with breath. They descended into green water near the reef, beams of light piercing gloom. They found coral, scattered seaweed, empty sand. No wreckage, no kayaks, no bodies. They surfaced hours later, shaking their heads. Renard logged the result. Dive negative. Families returned home that night carrying emptiness. Lena scrolled through old photographs on her phone. Ethan smiling at a barbecue, Ryan lifting a kayak above his head. She paused on an image of Ethan holding his paddle upright like a flag. The photograph seemed suddenly forensic, evidence of existence rather than memory. She saved it to a folder labeled Proof. The following morning, forensic analysts examined Ryan's phone again under stronger light. One technician noticed faint etchings across the cracked screen, scratches not from rocks but from deliberate pressure. Magnified photographs revealed a short sequence of marks, almost like letters. For hours they debated, accidental or intentional. Finally, the report concluded, indeterminate origin. Renard pinned the photograph of the damaged phone beside the paddles on his evidence board. 3 items, all mute. 3 pieces of a puzzle with no image. He stepped back, arms crossed, the hum of fluorescent light filling silence. Later that night, Clara entered her son's empty room. His jacket still hung behind the door, a faint salt smell clinging to the fabric. On the desk lay an unopened letter, bank paperwork marked with Ethan's signature. She traced the pen strokes with her finger, memorizing pressure and angle. Handwriting alive on paper, even when the writer was gone. She left the room with the letter folded in her pocket, as though holding a fragment of voice. The phone lay silent. The screen remained black. The testimony came from a fisherman who rarely spoke to authorities. Oliver Grant, 40 years old, weathered from years at sea, stepped into the Tauranga station carrying his logbook under one arm. His face was creased from sun and salt, his eyes cautious. He told Detective Mark Renard that on the night the kayakers vanished, he saw a flicker of light offshore. He opened his logbook, pages stiff from spray, ink blotched at corners. He pointed to the line marked 10:15 p.m., coordinates written in careful script. "There," he said, tapping the page. "Saw a light about a mile off the reef. Thought it was another boat." His voice lowered. "But there shouldn't have been one." Renard copied the coordinates onto the incident board. He asked about the quality of the light. Grant described it as brief, like a torch beam sweeping, then vanishing. He had not radioed it in. "Didn't think it mattered," he admitted. Now, standing under fluorescent glare, it mattered more than anything. Forensics requested his logbook for scanning. Each page was photographed, ink tested under ultraviolet. The entries aligned with radar records, except for the 15-minute gap during which the light was seen. That gap became a hollow space on the chart, circled in red. The families listened as Renard explained the discovery. Clara's hands tightened against the table edge. Lena leaned forward, voice sharp. "So they were alive then?" Renard's reply was measured. "It indicates presence, not survival." The words left the room colder than silence. At 11 a.m., the Coast Guard dispatched a vessel to search the exact coordinates. Crews dragged sonar across the area. The screen showed jagged ridges of reef, small schools of fish. No boats, no kayaks. The light remained an isolated anomaly. By 2 p.m., divers re-entered the water. They found broken coral, scattered net fragments, nothing linking directly to Ethan or Ryan. One diver surfaced holding a rusted fishing knife, blade corroded beyond use. Bagged, tagged, and logged, it joined the growing line of objects on Renard's table, each item a dead end. Still, the families clung to the coordinates. Clara pressed copies of the logbook entry into her purse, reading it aloud as if repetition could force certainty. 10:15 p.m., offshore reef, she whispered. The phrase became ritual. That night, Renard pinned a large map to the evidence board. Strings stretched from Tauranga to the reef, from the reef to Motiti Island, from the island into blank ocean. Each string converged at the coordinates Oliver Grant had written. The intersection formed a red knot at the board's center. Lena studied the knot. To her, it looked like a destination. To Renard, it looked like absence given shape. The logbook page was scanned, enlarged, and filed. The ink bled slightly under magnification, edges dissolving into gray. Yet the numbers were clear, stubborn in their precision. At midnight, the office quieted. Only the hum of refrigeration units and the scratch of Renard's pen remained. He wrote the last line of the day's report. 10:15 p.m., light observed, coordinates logged, no contact established. The map stared back at him, red knot pulsing under lamplight. A red mark on the map, no bodies found. Morning arrived gray, with drizzle pressing against the bay. Search crews dragged the shoreline again. Nets pulled tight across shallows. Officers walking in lines with eyes fixed on the tide. At 8:40 a.m., a volunteer shouted, raising an arm. Something bright had caught between rocks north of the harbor. Detective Mark Renard moved quickly, boots sinking into wet sand. He found a fluorescent life vest tangled in seaweed. It was unbuckled, straps loose, but intact. Inside one pocket lay a folded packet of energy gel. The wrapper bore smears of salt, expiration date still legible. Forensic officers bagged it, logged it, sealed it. By noon, another object surfaced farther south. A dry bag torn along one seam, its contents washed thin. Inside remained a water bottle half filled, and a small camping knife. The blade had initials etched shallow near the hilt, the letter R. Clara gasped when she saw it. Ryan Cole's habit had always been carving his name into gear. The knife was placed under ultraviolet light. Along its edge clung fine strands of fiber, pale gray, inconsistent with Ryan's clothing. Forensics tweezed them into a vial, labeling it 5B. No immediate match could be made. The object was returned to the table, shining under sterile bulbs. Lena leaned over the display, whispering as if Ryan might hear. "This is proof," she said. "They made it to shore." Renard didn't answer. His pen scratched across his report. Recovered, 1 dry bag, knife with etching, foreign fibers present. His handwriting was straight, controlled, untouched by hope. Later, divers explored waters east of Motiti Island. They found coral scraped white, as though plastic hulls had dragged across. Samples were collected, bagged, placed alongside the knife. The board grew crowded with photographs, paddles, jacket fragments, dry bag, knife. Each item was pinned with string, forming a constellation without center. Reporters swarmed outside the station that evening. They asked whether foul play was suspected. Renard replied evenly, "We have no evidence supporting that conclusion." His words satisfied no one. Cameras clicked, microphones thrust forward, voices rising. Inside, Clara sat silently, staring at the knife's photograph. At 10 p.m., Lena returned alone to the cordoned evidence room. The guard allowed her a brief look under supervision. She stared at the dry bag, its torn seam, the way water stains feathered outward. Her reflection glimmered on the plastic shield. It was less an object now than a message, half delivered, unreadable. Outside, rain strengthened. Puddles formed along the station steps. The city moved on with routine traffic and glowing windows, unaware of the 2 kayaks still unaccounted for. Only the families lingered, suspended between grief and refusal. The fibers from the knife remained under analysis. The lab's report came at 11:45 p.m. Synthetic blend, not consistent with clothing from missing persons. The file was clipped to the board, a thin sheet of contradiction. The case grew heavier with objects but no answers. Each item drew them closer to an event they could not reconstruct. The knife gleamed under UV light, fibers glowing purple. The phone rang at the Tauranga Marine office just after noon. The voice on the other end was male, rough, distorted by static. He claimed he had seen 2 men paddling toward Motiti Island on the night they vanished. The call lasted 20 seconds before the line clicked dead. No name, no number traced. Detective Mark Renard ordered the recording preserved. Technicians replayed it, isolating background noise. They heard gulls, faint engines, then silence. Nothing identified the caller. Still, the information shifted focus toward the island. By 3 p.m., officers reviewed ferry logs, fishing vessels, and any private craft that might have docked nearby. Nothing matched. That evening, attention turned to the harbor's security cameras. One feed showed a blurred shape around 9:30 p.m. 2 figures near the pier, barely visible through fog. They appeared to move together, one holding an object across his shoulder. The image flickered, distorted by raindrops clinging to the lens. Forensic analysts enlarged it, traced outlines, debated scale. Conclusion: indeterminate identity. Clara Hale stared at the still frame. "That's him," she said, pointing at the taller shadow. Lena leaned forward, eyes wet. "Both of them," she whispered. Renard remained silent, pressing the photo flat beneath a clear sleeve. He logged it. Camera anomaly. No confirmation. Search teams dispatched to Motiti Island the next morning found evidence of temporary habitation. A smoldered fire ring near driftwood, ashes scattered by wind. An empty can of beans, rust streaking its sides. Boot prints leading inland, direction lost in undergrowth. Each item bagged, tagged, photographed. Forensic anchor points multiplied, yet clarity receded. By dusk, investigators interviewed island residents. Some denied seeing strangers. One elderly woman hesitated, then admitted she had heard voices near the shore 2 nights earlier. Male, speaking quickly, words unclear. She hadn't left her house to check. Her account was recorded, transcribed, filed. Lena refused to leave. She walked the island's beach under fading light, searching sand with a torch. Near the tree line, she found a discarded bottle, label peeled away, cap missing. She turned it in to officers. They logged it, swabbed for prints. The lab reported later, no usable impressions. Meanwhile, Clara returned home to Ethan's childhood room. She unfolded the letter she had kept in her pocket, pressing it against the desk as if to compare handwriting. She stared at the photo stills again, the blurred shapes she believed were her son. The grain of the image felt like glass splinters against her eyes. Back at the station, Renard pinned the camera still beside the recovered knife, jacket, paddles. The board grew cluttered, string crisscrossing like veins in a body without organs. He stood back, breathing steady, then wrote in block letters across the top, Motiti, uncertain. The families read the word uncertain and felt the ground shift beneath them. The photograph remained blurred, 2 shadows lost in grain. The search of Motiti Island expanded inland, each step logged, each artifact sealed. Investigators found a weathered shack, half collapsed under vines. Inside, traces of occupation remained. 2 rusted tin cups, a bedroll with mildew, an extinguished fire pit lined with shells. Forensic officers dusted the cups for prints. None lifted. The bedroll yielded only mold. Yet on a small wooden table lay an object that shifted everything. It was a torn notebook page, damp at the edges, fibers curling outward. Across it, written in shaky block letters, were the words, 9:30 tide. The ink had bled, but the phrase stood legible. The page was bagged, tagged, catalogued as Exhibit 7A. Detective Mark Renard compared the writing with known samples. Ethan's signatures from his bank forms, Ryan's carved initials on gear, none aligned. Handwriting analysis confirmed. The note was produced by another hand. Unknown writer, unknown purpose. Still, the reference to tide suggested timing, planning. When Clara Hale saw the page, her throat tightened. "Someone was with them," she whispered. Lena Ward stared longer, tracing the words through plastic. Her mind clung to possibility. Perhaps Ethan had written it under duress, a signal left behind. But the expert report ended those hopes. Not consistent with either missing subject, investigators scoured the shack further. Behind a loose plank, they found an empty packet of crackers, expiration date matching late 2015. Dust suggested it had been opened months earlier. Beneath the floorboards, a length of nylon rope coiled, damp but intact. Bagged, tagged, placed alongside the notebook page, the shack became another node on Renard's evidence board. Photographs of its interior were pinned, string stretching from the page to the knife, from the rope to the kayak paddles. The web grew denser, more tangled. Each edition illuminated nothing. News spread quickly. Reports described a mysterious message discovered on Motiti Island. Headlines speculated about abduction, smuggling, hidden camps. Cameras circled the families again. Clara refused interviews. Lena answered briefly. If there's handwriting, there's someone else involved. Her statement replayed across evening broadcasts, her face pale under flashbulbs. That night, Lena returned to the shack with permission. She stood where the notebook page had been found, inhaling the smell of damp wood and salt. The air carried a weight of things unsaid. She pressed her hand against the table, cold under her palm. In the silence, she felt the tide rising outside, aligning with the scrawled message. Later, back at the station, the notebook page was laid flat under ultraviolet light. The words glowed faintly, strokes uneven, pressure weak. Analysts concluded the writer's hand shook, whether from haste, cold, or fear. Their report ended with a single phrase, "Origin unknown." The page rested in its sleeve, a riddle sealed in plastic, words on paper, no voice to explain them. Detective Mark Renard shifted focus from the shack to the sea lanes. If the two kayakers had vanished near Motiti Island, someone might have intercepted them. He ordered retrieval of all GPS data logged by commercial and private fishing vessels operating that night. The data arrived in sheets, numbers scrolling across printers, time-stamped lines of latitude and longitude. One record drew attention. A vessel registered to a local company, the Mariner's Edge, reported consistent positions until 9:15 p.m. Then its logs stopped. No coordinates recorded for 20 minutes. At 9:35 p.m., the entries resumed, showing the vessel already 5 nautical miles west, heading toward harbor. The absence was noted as blank sector. Forensics reviewed the digital file. The timestamps were authentic, with no signs of tampering. The gap was not erased. It was never entered. Weather during that interval was clear. Radar coverage steady. System offline was logged by the device at 9:17 p.m. System online at 9:34 p.m. In between, silence. Renard pinned the printout beside the map on his evidence board. The blank line gaped like a wound. He ordered interviews with the Mariner's Edge crew. Their statements were short, rehearsed. The system failed. They noticed nothing unusual. One crewman avoided eye contact. Another repeated the same phrasing twice, as though memorized. The families read transcripts with rising suspicion. Lena asked the obvious question. Why does a system fail exactly when 2 men disappear? Renard's answer remained flat. We investigate anomalies, not coincidences. Yet his pen circled the gap again, pressing harder with each pass. By noon the following day, technicians cross-checked radar data. The coast station radar showed a faint blip at 9:22 p.m. near the reef, then fading before it could be identified. Analysts could not confirm if it was a kayak, a small craft, or interference. The blip aligned precisely within the Mariner's Edge missing interval. Divers searched the same coordinates. Beneath shifting currents, they found debris, sections of fishing nets snagged on coral, frayed ends floating like hair. No hull fragments, no human remains. Bagged, tagged, stored. Renard's board filled with contradictions. The notebook page reading 9:30 tide. The blank sector from 9:15 to 9:35. The radar blip at 9:22. Each clue pointed toward a moment when something should have been seen, yet nothing was proven. Reporters circled again. Headlines read, "Fishing vessel silent during vanishing hours." Clara refused comment, retreating further from cameras. Lena, however, gave a statement under pale light. If equipment fails, lives fail with it. Her words carried across broadcasts, carved into sound bites. That evening, Renard stood alone in the evidence room. He traced string across his board, linking the shack's message to the blank sector, the radar blip to the paddles. Each connection ended in nothing, lines of thread leading into void. On his desk, the printout of the vessel log lay open. Its gap stared back, impossible to ignore, immovable as tide, a black gap on the log. No answers filled it. By early autumn, the official search lost momentum. Funding dwindled, hours reduced, and the Coast Guard declared further sweeps low probability. The families gathered in Clara Hale's house, blinds drawn. Photographs of Ethan and Ryan lined across the mantel. They refused to accept silence. Together, they began their own inquiry. Lena Ward pushed hardest. She returned to Samir Patel's kayak rental shop, demanding to see the original logbook. Patel hesitated, then produced it. His thick ledger bore neat entries for each customer, black ink filling rows of times. Lena flipped pages until her finger pressed the line for January 2016. The entry still read, 9 a.m., Hale, E. Cole, R. But her eyes caught something else. A later line, dated the same evening. It recorded the return of Kayak K-23, listed at 7:45 p.m. The writing appeared hurried, the digit 7 heavy, pressed over what looked like a faintly erased 6. Patel shifted uncomfortably under her stare. Detective Mark Renard re-examined the ledger. Under ultraviolet, fibers of erased graphite surfaced beneath the ink. The number had been altered. "Why?" he asked Patel. The shopkeeper stammered, claiming a mistake, a correction. But the alteration stood, fixed and undeniable. Forensic technicians inspected the returned kayak. Its hull bore scratches inconsistent with ordinary use, deep gouges along the underside, as though dragged across reef. More troubling were faint streaks of red paint near the bow. Samples were taken, bagged, tagged. Lab reports later matched the paint to fragments found on nylon rope recovered from the Motiti shack. The pattern grew. Rope fibers, paint streaks, altered logs. Each pointed toward contact, struggle, concealment. None resolved into certainty. Lena confronted Patel outside his shop. "Who brought the kayak back?" she demanded. He avoided her eyes, muttering about a young man he couldn't name, a hurried drop-off after dark. His description was vague, shifting with each retelling. Renard documented the statement but withheld judgment. News of the altered log leaked. Headlines framed Patel as negligent, perhaps complicit. Reporters camped outside his store. He stopped opening for days, shutters pulled down, phone unanswered. Families speculated, whispers swelling. Meanwhile, Clara sat at her kitchen table, ledger photocopies spread before her. She traced the overwritten digit 7 with a trembling finger. In her mind, it became a fracture line, proof that time had been bent, hidden. The number stared back, an artifact of denial. That night, Renard pinned a photo of the altered ledger page to his board. A thin string connected it to the red paint sample, then to the rope coil. His eyes followed the line back to the paddles, the first recovered evidence. Each piece leaned toward narrative, yet the gaps remained chasms. The board grew heavy with paper, its weight pulling nails loose from plaster. Still, it held. The ledger page glowed under UV, the overwritten numbers stark. The case seemed to collapse under its own weight until a tourist stepped forward. A German traveler named Klaus Weber contacted Tauranga police, explaining that he had been hiking the coastal trail on the night of the disappearance. Around 9:50 p.m., he heard voices carried across the wind. He raised his phone, switched on video, and recorded the sound. For years, he forgot the file existed, until news reports reignited memory. Detective Mark Renard summoned him to the station. The recording was transferred, timestamp verified. When played through the evidence room speakers, the sound filled the air. Wind rushing, gulls shrieking, then a faint, desperate cry. The word was fractured but clear enough. "Help!" It echoed once before vanishing under static. Forensic analysts dissected the clip. Waveform analysis highlighted the syllables, jagged peaks rising against background noise. The voice was male, tone higher than Ryan's, closer to Ethan's, but no conclusive match could be drawn. The report read, "Indeterminate speaker. Word, help, probability high." Clara Hale pressed her hands together, tears wetting her knuckles. "He was alive," she whispered. Lena leaned forward, whispering the word herself, as if repeating it could keep it breathing. Renard, however, remained cold. He wrote on the board, 9:50 p.m., auditory signal, help, location uncertain. The clip aired on national news. Its rawness spread across social media, debated endlessly. Some called it proof of survival. Others dismissed it as misheard gulls. The families clung to it, playing the second-long sound in loops, each repetition cutting deeper. At 11 p.m., technicians synchronized the recording with tide charts. The cry aligned with high tide at the reef. Combined with the notebook page reading 9:30 tide, the implication became sharper. Someone had known timing, someone had anticipated water movement. Yet who had written it remained unanswered. The following morning, police returned to the reef area. Divers searched again, dragging sonar, combing crevices. They recovered nothing but a twisted fragment of aluminum, likely from old fishing gear. Bagged, tagged, shelved. Another artifact stripped of context. In the evidence room, Renard pinned a spectrogram of the recording. The jagged outline of the word "help" stretched like a heartbeat across black paper. He stared at it under harsh light, the sound now made visible. To him, it was not proof but torment, an echo that confirmed suffering, not resolution. Clara kept a copy of the spectrogram in her purse. She unfolded it each evening, fingers tracing the peaks and valleys, as though touch might translate it into presence. Lena did the same with the audio file on her phone, pressing replay again and again until the word frayed into static. The file was archived, cataloged as Exhibit 10C. Its description ended with sterile clarity. Unverified vocalization. Content disputed. On the board, the waveform printout glowed blue under ultraviolet lamp, stark and unreadable as a pulse with no body. A cry for help froze in static, unanswered forever. By early winter, the official inquiry reached its end. Funding was exhausted, public attention diverted, and the file prepared for closure. The families refused acceptance. They pooled money, hiring private divers to search waters the Coast Guard had abandoned. Each dive was logged with precision. Time submerged, depth reached, coordinates marked. On the 12th descent at 3:45 p.m., a diver surfaced clutching a fragment. It was metal, corroded, twisted, half buried in silt. Underwater cameras later revealed its shape more fully. A rectangular frame, once part of a kayak seat mount, its bolts still attached. Nylon cord tangled around it, strands frayed yet stubborn. Forensic testing confirmed the nylon-matched rope found in the Motiti shack. The red paint smeared across its fibers aligned with samples from the returned kayak. The chain of objects tightened, kayak, rope, shack, all bound by the same red trace, yet still no bodies. The divers brought more. Scattered shards of plastic hull, edges clean, almost cut. Analysts debated whether reef abrasion could create such lines. Reports filed. Possibility of collision or deliberate damage. Words weighted, sterile, inconclusive. Clara Hale sat in the evidence room as photographs of the frame were pinned. She whispered her son's name each time another string stretched across the board. Lena Ward refused to sit. She paced, eyes burning, repeating the pattern aloud. Kayak, rope, paint, shack, tide. Her voice cracked into silence. Renard wrote the lab's conclusion in block letters. Kayak fragments, consistent with rental models. He underlined it twice, then stepped back. The board sagged under paper and string, a body stitched together without organs, held upright by pins alone. News outlets broadcast the discovery. Headlines declared, "Kayak frame found in depths." Reporters speculated about collision with illegal fishing vessels, smuggling routes, even sabotage. Public imagination leapt further than evidence ever could. For the families, the fragments confirmed one truth: the kayaks had broken. At dusk, Clara walked the shoreline where the paddles had first appeared. She carried the photograph of the nylon cord laminated by police. She pressed it against her chest as waves licked her shoes. Around her, the beach emptied, but she remained, whispering Ethan's name into wind that answered only with hiss. That night, divers stored the recovered fragments in crates, labels marked with black ink, Exhibit 11A, 11B, 11C. The pieces looked less like wreckage than bones lifted from a grave. Under ultraviolet light, the nylon strands glowed faint crimson. Analysts noted dried residue, too faint for definitive blood confirmation. The report ended cold. Result inconclusive. Fragments on the table, rope coiled like veins cut loose. Years passed. The official file was archived, its pages sealed in gray boxes marked unresolved. Reporters moved on, headlines faded, and only the families remained tethered to absence. Clara Hale lived alone in the same house, blinds always drawn. Ethan's room remained untouched, bed made, jacket still behind the door, a faint smell of salt locked in fabric. One autumn morning, a small package arrived at her door. No return address, only her name typed in block letters. Inside, wrapped in plain brown paper, lay a single photograph. The edges had curled with age, The colors faded to sepia. It showed a barren shoreline, horizon flat, sky empty. At the center were two kayak paddles, laid side by side upon sand. No kayaks, no figures, no footprints leading in or out. Clara carried the photograph to Detective Mark Renard. He examined it under magnification. Forensic analysts tested the paper and ink, dating it precisely to 2016. No fingerprints lifted, no camera source traced. Whoever sent it had erased themselves as thoroughly as the sea erased prints. The image was pinned to the center of the evidence board. String drawn once more to paddles, rope, fragments, ledger, notebook page. The circle closed without answer. Every artifact spoke, yet none explained. Lena Ward held the photo longer than anyone else. She studied the paddle's angle, the sand's texture, shadows lengthening behind them. She convinced herself someone had arranged them deliberately, a ritual or a message. Clara saw only an echo, objects preserved while bodies vanished. The community fractured. Some whispered of crime, others of currents too strong, others of secrets not meant for surface. Official statements remained sterile, case unsolved. For families, silence became punishment. Each object collected, each note filed, became a reminder that the men existed only in fragments. At night, Clara placed the photograph beside Ethan's framed portrait. Two images of absence faced each other. One of youth, alive and smiling. One of paddles, mute and solitary. She sat between them, whispering prayers without word. Detective Renard closed his file. He wrote the final line with a pen that dragged heavy across paper. Evidence exhausted, no conclusion possible. He placed the file in the archive, yet the photograph lingered in his mind. Two paddles on barren sand, posed like gravestones without names. Outside, waves continued their endless cycle, swallowing and returning fragments at will. The sea gave back objects, never the men. Two paddles lay side by side. No bodies followed.